Day 24 of the program. We're in day 4, week 5, focused on turning our strategies into frameworks so that we're scaling our value that we're creating. Again, reminder of value. Value in two ways. Value when people, things take the things that we create and use them, and they generate value from that. They generate outcomes from that. And also value is generated from us, from the experience of working with us. And we're going to see this again here when we take the next step in our frameworks. So publishing framework. You understood what framework was. You decided the method, the build framework, agile, enterprise. And then you went ahead and looked at a strategy that you've done or you're doing and defined things that are accelerating value, define the things that are pre-handling objections, define the things that are creating objections, and you looked at those elements and you decided to keep, remove in order to understand the components of your strategy that you're going to use for your framework. Now, with that in mind, you're going to need to start to put together some things so that other people can implement those steps that you're keeping in as your framework so you can export your strategy. So essentially, you're looking for the components of the framework and converting them into assets, converting them into communications, branding, tracking, advisement, and coaching so that others can actually implement your strategy in their part of the business or in a broader part of the business. So what do assets look like? It's not anything particularly complicated. So essentially spreadsheets, documents, instructions, examples on how to implement your strategy. That's all you have to put together. So a spreadsheet, series of steps, an inventory of assets, documentation on how to do things, case studies of iterations of the strategy and successful outcomes. These are all assets that you can put together so that people can take that and use that. Example, communications, like if you are working on the client side, things that you can send to the clients, things that you can send to stakeholders, things that just kind of make it easy for others to execute your strategy. And these things demonstrate not only your ability to execute and strategize, but also your professionalism. So if people see the quality of work that you do through this, it adds to your leadership brand because you're showing your professionalism. Communications. So how should implementers communicate the strategy to their stakeholders? We talked earlier in the week that perhaps if your strategy is being used outside of your group and there's a different set of stakeholders that have certain expectations of outcomes of this person and then implementing something, how should that implementer that you're working with communicate with their stakeholders maybe to get their buy-in? What kind of collateral should you create to support them? As an example, perhaps a presentation that helps to sell the strategy, that shows the outcomes, that shows the kinds of problems that this strategy solves for. You can put those materials together so that other people can use it. So also, how can you ensure that all the language you are including in your assets is understandable to most? So we talked about like jargon and vanity. You just be very prescriptive in the assets. Like sometimes it means you could be very dry. So just plainly explain something, quantify things, give examples, give data, just make it simple, plain. And ultimately, what I'm saying is sometimes in our communications, we can use words that people interpret in different ways because they're more descriptive words or hyperbole. So just be very careful with that kind of language and the assets that you're putting together, in particular, the communications. Like from an executive level, what's the kind of language that you can help the person with to use to get those stakeholders to buy into the framework? We'll talk a little bit more about communication next week in terms of particular types of language. So before sending out or publishing your framework, maybe just wait a week, and you can get some more insight in terms of executive communications. Excuse me. So branding. You want people to remember that it's your strategy, right? So come up with a brand name for your strategy. Like, this is where you get to have a little bit of fun. Even consider a logo. And, you know, you can use these things on all your materials. It's called branding. So when people see that, they associate it with the strategy and hopefully the success with that strategy and the branding. And immediately creates the connection to people that are seeing these documents and these communications that you're putting together. So you can use this everywhere. Also, make sure to include your contact information for people that are implementing it so they can reach out to you for support. And it's also an opportunity for you to make sure that you're getting credited for the strategy. You're the author of the strategy. You want to make sure that you have your name tied to it. Tracking. So include how to measure the success of the implementation. Did you use a dashboard that was very relevant to the strategy? Is that something that someone can easily copy and use in their implementation of it? Or perhaps a spreadsheet or some kinds of methods, like whatever tracking mechanisms, make that a part of the package that you're putting together for somebody that wants to implement your strategy. And also establish connections with the implementers and check-ins to track their progress. There's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, you're going to want to help these people to be successful. You're going to get certain gratification of somebody kind of taking your baby and applying it to their work and be successful. It's an opportunity for you to coach them. You're coaching other people that are doing leadership work, and you're helping them to be a better leader. It's also an opportunity for you to get an update on what's happening with the implementation of your strategy through your framework, because you'd like to know that your strategic work is having an impact, and you want to be able to record that impact so that you can apply it to when you represent yourself and your team. So it's good to find ways to have these check-ins so that you can get that data and also help these team members. So essentially, like, the branding and the tracking enables you to become like a product manager for your strategy and your framework, or a program manager, if that phrase is more relevant for you. You're keeping track of not only the outcomes and not only coaching, but these people are going to adapt your strategy to their situations. And that's data that you can use to then take and allow your strategy to be even applied more broadly, and to redefine that strategy yet again. You could potentially get more and more iterations of your strategy, and then use that data to make the strategy even better so it handles larger scope. So take the opportunity to do that. Engage with the people that are implementing your strategy. Give them opportunities to communicate with you, either through standing meetings, office hours, whatever method works for you, but stay involved, because it's not just about creating the assets and creating the framework and scaling your strategy to another part of the organization. It's your opportunity to work with other people, maybe that you don't always lead, and to lead them in a specific area and generate outcomes against that level of scope. So make sure you really leverage the outcomes of people implementing your strategies. And this is where the advising and the coaching comes in. Like I mentioned, things may need to be adapted, and be there for the team members. Set up one-on-ones, set up an office hour where people can join virtually and you can give feedback and coach people through it, or allow ad hoc. Create a group around this strategy, this initiative that you're doing, so that people can ask you questions and that you can lead them through it. You're helping them to gain the outcomes from your strategy. This is one of the main reasons you're going to want to use your strategy, because they've seen it be successful. It's reliably successful, and they can take it and they can use it in their part of the business and be successful too. And you can help coach them through that success. And it's a win-win for everyone. So This is an interesting question. Should you implement an iteration of your strategy? This is kind of, so first, let me pause here. What does that mean? So let's say your strategy is applicable to a broader part of the business. And either somebody says, well, why don't you do it on this part of the business or expand it out to this part of the business? Or an implementer thinks that your strategy would be great on their part of the business, but maybe they can't do it or they're not confident to do it, whatever the reason is. And instead of you indirectly leading it, you could possibly directly lead it. So the first thing you should ask yourself is, well, based upon your aspirations and the targets that you set for yourself and exceeding expectations, is this an opportunity that aligns to all of that? Generally, if somebody that's like a career gatekeeper, influencer is like, hey, here's more scope, your strategy was successful, now scale this, that's generally an opportunity for the next level. So if I were faced with that circumstance, I would likely say yes to that, unless there was some reason why I wouldn't. But I think there's a definite difference between that and somebody that thinks it would be great for their team, but for some reason just doesn't want to implement it. I think you really need to question that and understand, do an interview with them or ask some questions to understand that if they think it's so great, why they're not prioritizing the implementation of it in their own team, and just understand why. And then based upon the information that you get, determine if this is something that you want to execute. Will it help you to exceed those expectations that you defined based upon your targets? Does it come at an opportunity cost of one of your other targets? You need to assess for this, but it can possibly create the opportunity for you to directly lead additional implementations of your strategy as a framework, and even at a broader scale, which could be a holy grail in terms of opening up a window for you and demonstrating your leadership and enabling you to do more transformational work. All right, so the action item, do the exercise, do the exercise, do the exercise. So take an existing or potential strategy and consider the collateral you could create to support an additional impact or more broader implementation of your strategy. What's the collateral that you can create? Kind of like branding, could you think of? What were the tracking mechanisms that you could include? How would you advise and consult other implementers to take your strategy and use it on their part of the business? And what if somebody said to you, well, why don't you do the implementation? Under what circumstances would you say yes? All right, so that's day 4 of week 5, focusing on scaling your strategy through a framework. We will come back tomorrow to finish up this week. Until then.